do too. So there you go. Let us recap. I want to make sure that everything is sinking in. Week one, what are the 3 P's to understanding the culture of the Bible?
You lost me on that.
Patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal. That's right. Patriarchal. You get. Somebody give her a high five. Okay. Patriarchal. I love how 50% of you gave her like long distance air high fives. You just went, yeah, I can't reach you, but good job. Way to go. There you go. Patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal. Who are the 5 individuals in the eras that we need to know to understand the Old Testament?
Abraham,
Adam, David,
Moses.
Correct.
Somebody's almost still.
I heard some permutation of all of the names in that murmuring, and very few of them were in the right order, but that's okay. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and David. What are the 3 regions that we need to understand?
Somehow, this makes the.
Correct. Again. Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Egypt. And what's unique about Canaan? Why is that strip of land so important? Yeah, it's a land bridge between the 2 superpowers of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Now we're going to get a little interesting. This was last week. What is fictive kinship? Now, don't everybody just murmur stuff, okay? Because I know I just won't get it. So fictive kinship. Somebody give me, yeah, dude.
Is that the one where you don't have a lineage, somebody you can, I don't want to say, you get to use the example of like adoption or something?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. It's forming a kinship tie where there is no blood or marriage connection. Way to go. Fictive or fictional kinship. And then we talked about 2 types of treaties, 2 types of covenants. Somebody tell me what those 2 are. Sarasota, no, is not right. We're close. We're in the ballpark. Suzerain vassal, and what's the other one? Parity. Parity and suzerain vassal. What's the difference between them? Parity is equal, and suzerain vassal what? Unequal, right? One is more powerful than the other, and which of those is most important to understand really the Old Testament and all of Scripture? The suzerain vassal treaty. Perfect. You all are budding experts in Old Testament culture, Old Testament theology, the ancient Near East. You've got a working knowledge of the timeline of the area of the Fertile Crescent. You've wrapped your mind around the concept of covenant. You guys are doing well. Now that we've got all the background stuff in our little backpack, okay, we can move on to the actual story itself. Okay, so we're going to move on to the actual story. And as Julie Andrews sang in The Sound of Music, and once again, I didn't turn the volume up loud enough.
The hills are alive.
Yeah, it's not that song. We're going to start at the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. And I'm not going to sing because you've already criticized my singing, Todd. Anyway, specifically, we're going to start at the very beginning with God's original intent. And that's important when we study books like the Bible. It's different when we read a novel. When you read a novel, the author's intent is to probably entertain you and to sell a lot of books, right? But when we're talking about God's story, it's important to understand and to examine what the original intent actually was. And so as we look at the story as a whole, and specifically at the very beginning, we see that God's original intent can be summed up in one word: Eden. Eden was God's original intent. That was the end goal in the beginning. Now, in Eden, we don't have any sort of formal covenant making. There weren't any animals sacrificed, so there won't be any demonstrations this week. I know you're sad. Some of you were really not happy with me last week. and that makes me happy. So, so there wasn't a formal covenant in every sense of the term, but we do see some of the profile of the Berit, or the covenant that we talked about. Remember, we talked about the structure of the covenant. We do see some of that. So in this encounter, in the very beginning between, where we see the beginning of creation, who would be the suzerain? If we're talking about a suzerain-vassal treaty at the very beginning, who would be the suzerain? God, right? Yahweh. Yahweh is the suzerain, and how about the vassal? Who's the vassal? Adam, right? Adam, humanity, Adam and Eve, however you want to talk about that, is the vassal. Okay? Now, part of the covenantal agreement is a statement about blessings. When you think back to the creation story, when you think back to the story of Adam and Eve, what were those in the case of Adam and Eve? What were the blessings that were promised to Adam and Eve?
He can eat from the same tree.
Okay, yeah, I can eat from pretty much anything, but let's go bigger than that. What did Adam and Eve have available to them? Paradise, everything, right? They had paradise available to them. And so if they remain faithful to the agreement, faithful to the covenant, they'll have paradise forever. Okay? But there is one negative stipulation. Oftentimes you see in the covenant agreement there's some sort of negative stipulation. What was the negative stipulation given at the very beginning between Yahweh and Adam, Yahweh and Adam? Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? So that was the one negative stipulation, don't eat from it. And it seems like a fairly random law, I think. It's like this, it's so weird that he would give him this one tree that he's not able to eat from. But what it does summarize is that it summarizes the one law of Eden. God is God, we are not. It basically sums up everything you need to know about the law in Eden. So if they simply acknowledge the authority of God, if they accept their role as stewards, as managers of all of creation, they're going to remain in paradise forever. Pretty sweet deal, right? But if they chose that they needed to be free, if they chose that they needed to have autonomy instead, what would happen?
You get kicked out.
Worse than that. They would die, right? They would die. And you know how it unfolds. They choose autonomy, and from there forward, the curse is set free. And so, before we get to the actual story, we need to focus on how God first defined the relationship. And we find that in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Now, how many of you have read the creation account in the book of Genesis? It's okay if you haven't, it's fine. You may have noticed, and you may have questioned, why are there two? Have you ever noticed that? Like there seems to be one in Genesis chapter 1, and then there's another one in Genesis chapter 2. And beyond that, why does it break where it does? If you have your Bibles, you can open it up and see that it breaks in a weird spot. Because it looks like the first telling of the creation story extends into chapter 2, to around verses 3 or 4. So why does it break there? Well, chapters and verses were not in the original text. Okay, those were added in the Middle Ages so that you could cite references easy and to better study it. So, just imagine if you didn't have chapters and verses and you wanted to refer someone to a particular psalm. And you'd have to go, okay, like it's in Psalms, it's about 2/3 of the way through. Look for the words, the Lord was gracious. That's the verse I'm referring, like, what a mess, right? So those were added in the Middle Ages so you could cite them. But if you were to divide this scripture based on the unique style, the unique literary structure, it would probably be broken down between verses 3 and 4 of chapter 2 instead of where it's broken. Still doesn't answer the question. Why are there two different accounts of how it all began? Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, they give us different stories and orders of God's creation. Genesis chapter 1 is more of a, this is just one of the ways that they're different, is more of a big overarching view of the bigness of God. Chapter 2 gives a more anthropomorphic description of God. So God is described as a craftsman in verse 7 of chapter 2, as a gardener in chapter 8, as a builder in chapter 22. So what do we do with the differences? Okay. First, I think it's safe to assume that they're complementary of each other. Okay, some people look at it and go, "Oh, they're different, so that means the Bible, you can't trust the Bible." Well, the author who is compiling everything wouldn't have put them right next to each other if they weren't complementing each other in some way, shape, or form. So let's look at the comparisons. Hopefully you can see this. Some of the writing is small. If you can't see it, you don't need to take notes. It won't be on the test. There is no test. Genesis chapter 1, we just see some of the difference here. Genesis chapter 1, the creation of humanity follows the creation of all the other creatures in Eden. Okay, so humanity comes after all the other creatures. Genesis chapter 2, the creation of humanity precedes the creation of plant life and animals. Genesis 1, the Hebrew word Elohim is used for God, whereas in Genesis chapter 2, Yahweh, the Hebrew words Yahweh and Elohim are used for God. Genesis chapter 1, the Hebrew word bara is used for create. It's a different word in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 1, the narrative is somewhat isolated. It's not linked to the narrative that follows in any obvious manner. You know, like you might expect if you're reading something and then the next thing happens, it doesn't seem to follow. But Genesis chapter 2, the narrative has a sequel that carries the reader through chapters 3 and 4 and all the way through chapter 11. Genesis chapter 1, the creation of humanity is accomplished by means of divine decree, which means God did what to make everything? Spoke. God just said, "Let there be," and there it was. Genesis chapter 2, again, this is the anthropomorphic sort of description of God. God forms Adam from the clay of the earth. As a potter would a vessel, he breathes life into him. He takes Adam's rib to build the second human. Genesis chapter 1, male and female are created at the same time. Genesis chapter 2, Adam is created first and then Eve is created. Genesis chapter 1, the text is highly structured and poetic. You see a repetitive pattern going on through it. God said, and it was, and there is evening and there is morning, the first day, etc., etc. Genesis chapter 2 is more of a narrative in its genre. Okay, so there shows you some of the discrepancies between chapters 1 and 2. We still haven't gotten to why are they different. Okay, we're going to get to it, but before we get to that, have you ever read a book that had a great opening line? Like just you read the book and you're like captured from the very beginning. I got some books that have some great opening lines. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. It was a pleasure to burn. What a great opening line, right? The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold starts, "My name was Salmon, like the fish, first name Susie. I was 14 when I was murdered on December 6, 1973. Like, I need to go to the library and get that book, because that is a great opening line. Pride and Prejudice. I'm fairly confident no man knows this opening line, but most of the women do. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of what? A wife." Right. And then this next one, I don't know the book at all. I've never read it. I love the opening line. "We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck." And I apologize if you're offended by that language. It's a great opening line. I might have to get that book too. Genesis chapter 2 and 3 were likely ancient material that was treasured for generations before it was actually compiled into what we now know as Genesis. But Genesis 1 was then written to help us provide a lens to help us understand all of the Pentateuch. What's the Pentateuch? First 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which is sort of the backbone of all of Scripture. So since Genesis 1 was there to help us understand the Pentateuch and therefore all of Scripture, according to Sandra Richter, who wrote Epic of Eden, she says Genesis 1 serves as the introduction to our faith. Okay? If this is the case, what was going through the author's mind when he was writing this grand introduction, when he was writing this great opening line to this story? I don't think that it was to give us chronological or geological description of how to understand where the world came from. I don't think it was concerned about giving us information about how old or how young the earth is, or about dinosaurs. Okay? The author's primary focus was to educate the wayward children of Yahweh about who God was and what this God expects out of them. So basically, Genesis 1 is there to answer 2 questions. Who is God? And what is God's relationship to us? Who is God, and what is God's relationship to us? Now, before we unpack that question, those questions in their entirety, we'll look at the structure of the creation account, and it's broken up into what?
Books.
No. When we talk about this, 7 days, right? That's a standout aspect that you notice right away when you're looking at the creation account, that there's a 7-day structure that culminates in the what? Sabbath. It culminates in the Sabbath. So because of this 7-day structure, there have been several theories formed about creation, several theories that have been developed. So we're going to look at some of those. First, there is the gap or reconstruction theory. The gap or reconstruction theory. So according to this theory, there is a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and that gap is filled in this way. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and there was war in heaven, and Satan and a third of the angels waged war against God and his angels. And Satan was defeated and cast down to earth, and as a result, the earth was or became formless and void. Tohu wabohu. I don't know if that's right. And darkness was moving over the surface of the waters. Genesis 1:1-2. Does this theory sound familiar to anybody? Only a couple of us. Like this I grew up with this theory. This was the theory I grew up with. I always heard about that there was this massive war, that Satan and a third of his angels tried to overthrow God, that God threw him and all those angels out of heaven. Okay? And so the idea behind this theory is that the 6 days of creation are actually 6 days of recreation. 6 days of recreation. Because of the rebellion of Satan and his angels, God had to wipe everything out and start all over again. Where do you get that? Where do you get that? Well, it comes largely from a few prophetic writings: Isaiah chapter 14, Ezekiel 28, Revelation 12. And it seems really weird to take these random prophetic passages from other scriptures and kind of shoehorn them in between these 2 verses. So why in the world would we do that? And actually, most Hebrew scholars say that it doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no justification for taking those passages and shoehorning them in between these verses. So why? Where did this theory come from? Well, the Hebrew word for formless and void, tohu wabohu, is used elsewhere in Isaiah 34 and Jeremiah 4. And those are used to describe the destruction of the land in those passages. So if it meant destruction, bless you, if it meant destruction in those other passages, then then something must have been destroyed in these passages. Because over there, it meant destroyed, and so naturally, in Genesis chapter 1, it means the same thing. I think they're looking at it the wrong direction, though. Instead of saying, it must mean destroyed, where it says formless and void, maybe we need to look at it the other way, that formless and void should be used to help define what Jeremiah and Isaiah were talking about. That it was destroyed to such an extent that it seemed like it was formless and void. So instead of using those passages in Isaiah and Jeremiah to define Genesis, what if we use Genesis to define Isaiah and Jeremiah? Okay? Another reason why this theory did that make sense? Okay, good. Another reason why this theory was developed to give space for anything that turned up in the fossil record. Fossils, Darwin's theory, the 19th and 20th century. If the story of Adam doesn't take place until the destruction of this original creation, there's now this indefinable period of time between the birth of the earth and the introduction of humans to account for, let's just say, the dinosaurs. It's like we can't make sense of the timeline. Dinosaurs were however many millions of years ago, but we don't have evidence of humans, so there must be some sort of gap that we're missing. And so let's develop a theory that this gap is just shoehorned between these two verses. So that's where that theory came from. Oh, my battery's gonna die. That's a bummer. I should go get my cord. Talk amongst yourselves for 1 minute. I'll be back.
I don't know where I saw this. Where there are sandal prints right next to dinosaur prints in the same rock. I need to maybe go back and do some research. It's not like the only instance where these are supposed to be a billion years apart in our believed timeline. Because I know the evolutionists need to.
Okay, stop talking. We're back. Thanks for your patience. All right, next theory. Geological era theory. This became popular in the 19th century. It continues today. And the essence is that each of the 6 days of creation correspond to 6 eras of indefinable length. So instead of them actually being 24-hour periods of time, they're indefinable. And the theory is because the Hebrew word for day is a flexible term, and it can also be used to talk about, again, an undefined period of time. Theologians, when this theory came about, were excited to see how the evidence was emerging from science that was similar to what was spelled out in creation, but it was only similar. It didn't match up really well. A couple of issues with that. The sun was not created until day 4. Okay, so that doesn't really match up with what science says. In contrast to scientific models, trees precede ocean life. Science doesn't really match up with that. Birds precede insects. Another instance where science doesn't really match up with what is spelled out there. And then the chronology of events in chapter 2 differ from chapter 1. So which one do we follow to go along with these eras of indefinable length? So there's issues with both of these popular theories, but the biggest issue is that they attempt to answer questions that the author was not trying to answer. The author was not trying to answer, where do the dinosaurs fit in? Okay? My son, Nafi, is into football cards. He's 9, and he's into football cards. And he's always looking up his cards to see if they're worth anything. And most of them are not. But let's just say he were to happen upon a Jerry Rice rookie card. If you don't follow football, that would be a nice card to have. And so if he were to say, hey Dad, how much is this Jerry Rice rookie card worth? And I were to say, here son is a dictionary. Look it up. How much help is that going to be? None. It's going to provide him zero help whatsoever, right? Because that book wasn't written to answer that question. If I were to hand him the Beckett football card price guide, that would help him out, right? That's going to help him figure out how much that card is worth. And so the key to biblical interpretation is letting Scripture define its own agenda instead of trying to create an agenda for it. So let it decide what questions it's answering instead of forcing our own questions upon it. Which takes us to another theory, the literal or 24-hour day theory. And this comes from the fact that the author calls them what? Days, right? The author says that they're days. And there are people who point out problems with this theory, that there are no sources of light, so no way to measure a day until day 4. But then there are plenty of people who subscribe to this theory, and you might be one of them. And I don't want to duke it out, right? But what I do want to do is I want to offer an alternative theory. What might the author have had in mind and wanted to communicate by using a 7-day framework? Okay. Now it's important to note a couple things. After the first 5 days, in which everything that God created was called what? Good. Everything was created good. On day 6, humanity was entered into the mix. And the amount of words dedicated to the 6th day is nearly double that than any other day. Which means the author's trying to say something. So like if you and I were having a conversation, I use this example when I preach on the Sabbath. If you and I are having a conversation and I talked at you for like an hour, which is believable because I do that every Wednesday here with a microphone. But if I were to talk at you for an hour and 40 minutes of that hour would be on one topic, you would think he has something that he's trying to say, like this is important to him for some reason, right? So it's important to note that when they talk about creating humans, there are more words dedicated to that. Also, the 7th day is significant, not just because that's the day that God created the Sabbath, but 7 is pretty significant in Hebrew literature. So what did the author mean? Let's look at the framework theory. Every year, I make a calendar for my dad for Christmas. I've been doing it for years. So he can see pictures of the kids, and so he can have the dates of everyone's birthdays. But now he doesn't even look at the calendar anymore, so he doesn't remember those birthdays anyway. Fine. It's fine. The calendar contains mostly pictures of my kids. Occasionally a picture of me and my wife slip in there, although on this particular page, I'm in every picture. That was unintentional. But when I make this calendar, by and large, it's not created chronologically. The collections are not chronological. Like I'll have particular themes. This particular theme would be what? Sports, right? This is my sports theme at a Guardians-Reds game, a Browns-Colts game, a Guardians-Pirates game, and a Buckeyes game. And so I use themes to group them together. And the framework theory uses a similar structure. The author uses the framework of 7 days, framework of a week, as a literary device. And so instead of placing things in chronological order, he groups them according to theme. So the idea of the week can best be shown this way. Okay? So in this framework, we see certain things created in days 1 through 3, and then corresponding things created in verses 4 through 6. So in days 1, 2, and 3, we see the habitats of the planet being created. All of the habitats. You have day and night. You have the waters above the heavens and the waters below. And then you have land and vegetation. Verses 4 through 6, you see the inhabitants of the habitations being created that correspond with those. So on day 4, we see the sun and the moon being created to go along with the day and the night. Day 5, we see the birds and the fish that correspond with the waters above, or the heavens and the waters below. And then on day 6a, first part of 6a, we see land animals and humanity created there to go along with the land and vegetation. Simply coincidence or intentional on the author's part? And if intentional, what does it communicate? So let's look at the rest of day 6, or as it says on the chart there, 6b. 6b, we see that man and woman were created as a reflection of God himself, but unlike all of the other inhabitants, this inhabitant was told to rule over all of the others. So I'm going to, if you're still writing this, I'm going to come back to it. But Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28 and 31 says this. Then God said, let us make humanity in our image to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and all the crawling things on the earth. God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them, male and female, God created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and master it. Take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and everything crawling on the ground. God saw everything he made. It was supremely good. There was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. So in Genesis chapter 1, I'll go back to the chart in case you're still writing that. God lays out the framework of creation, first by the habitation, and then by the inhabitants or the rulers of each of the habitations. But there's a structure here that suggests that there's one ruler who rules over all of the creation. That is Adam or Adam, the Hebrew term for humanity. So this one was made in the image of God. This one was made to be the ultimate steward over all of creation and God's representative in creation. But we're not done. We're not done yet. Remember, the first section is separated around verses 3 or 4 of chapter 2. So what does the author have to say in those first verses of chapter 2? He says this. The heavens and the earth and all who live in them were completed. On the 6th day, God completed all the work he had done. And on the 7th day, God rested from all the work that he had done. God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all the work of creation. So God's laid out this framework first by what? Habitation, right? And then by the inhabitant, right? Then by giving Adam the responsibility to care for all of it. But here, the author contends that there's one ruler that's above all of it all. And that is the Lord of the Sabbath. That is Yahweh. That is God. So God chose to manage his creation through Adam, but all of it is ultimately under the supreme authority of who? Of God, right? So regardless of what you believe about science, creation, the timing of all of it, this message is definitely a part of the message that the author of Genesis 1 is trying to communicate. Now, as you think through what we've talked about in past weeks, particularly last week, does the arrangement that we just looked at, does it sound familiar at all?
Yep, to me it does.
How does it sound familiar, Jason?
Because first five, the first three, you talk about the creation or whatever. Then the five, the habitat, and then you go 4 through 6, and that's the, I had it on top of my head, whatever that was after the habitat. Because the first through 1 through 3, when you go to the habitat, that's when he started making his creation. And when he started talking about the author on the bottom, it sounds like to me it adds up all together.
Gotcha. Good. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Does the arrangement of somebody having authority, but then there being a greater authority over that individual, does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Anything we talked
That's what I
about,
was trying to say.
suzerain vassal treaty, right? Because the vassal still had control of their land, still had their government, still had their traditions, but the suzerain had supreme authority over that vassal, right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so in Genesis chapter 2, it becomes especially clear as the suzerain who is who? God, right? Yahweh offers his vassals who is who? Adam and Eve. The land grant of Eden with a stipulation of caring for it. The Lord God took the human and settled him in the Garden of Eden to farm it and to take care of it. Here's paradise. There's your blessing. Here's the stipulation. Take care of it. Okay? In essence, Adam and Eve are free to do whatever they want except decide what is good and evil. Yahweh reserves that right to make that decision for himself. So Adam and Eve had the most perfect situation imaginable for all of eternity. They had Eden for all of eternity and perfect communion with God. And so God's perfect plan all along from the very beginning was the people of God in the place of God, dwelling in the presence of God. That's God's perfect plan all along. But as it is with all covenants, it was dependent upon whom? The vassal. It was dependent upon the vassal. It was up to them to accept or reject that. Any questions?
This one I've been pondering on. I asked Bucky on this. When we started, when Yahweh gave Adam and he formed Eve, okay, and that garden in that. And that's why I brought up to Bucky. Okay, they had all the fruit trees they could eat off of except for the apple tree. Okay. And I asked Becky, I said, what happens if they eat all the fruits off those trees, and the only thing that's left is the apple tree? And then dang well they can't eat off of it. But how would they survive and eat something to keep their nourishments up?
Well, let me make a statement and then let me ask you a question. Okay? First of all, we don't know if it was an apple. We don't know what kind of fruit it was. Just to be nitpicky, okay? But let me ask you this. Based on what you know of God, do you think God would let that happen? That God would give us all of paradise, but it was limited. It's going to run out. And you're going to be faced with that choice of, do I die or do I eat from this tree that's going to make me die? Right? I don't think our God is that cruel.
Yeah.
Okay? Right.
But, you know, not from here, but other churches or other people I've been talking to, you know, they said they know where we're at now. And I had this one today ask me the same question that I asked you. You know, that's why I was asking.
Well, give him that answer, because it was a good one, and I just made it up.
I know, but I'm just
There you
saying,
go,
that's
yeah.
why I was trying to ask you.
There you go. There you go. All right, let me press on. Let's talk about Sabbath for a minute. The language of rest in Genesis chapter 2. Okay? Rest, typically, the Hebrew word nuah is the word that was typically used when talking about rest. It was something that kings did when they had basically conquered all of their land. They conquered their domain, and their domain was fully under their control. An example of this is 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 1. It says, when the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his surrounding enemies, ... Okay, so a king who had proven themselves rested. Yahweh proved himself as the king of the cosmos, so Yahweh did what? Yahweh rested. However, Genesis chapter 2, it's a different word used for rest, Sabbat, to describe Yahweh's resting. And the goal in using that different word is to direct the reader's attention somewhere else. That's why he used whoever wrote this used a different word, and that elsewhere is the giving of the Sabbath ordinance on Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11 says this, remember the Sabbath day and treat it as holy. 6 days you may work and do all your tasks, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Do not do any work on it, not you, not your sons or daughters, your male or female servants, your animals, the immigrant who is living with you. Because the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything that is in them in 6 days, but what? Rested on the seventh day. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Imagine what it was like for the Israelites on Mount Sinai. Just a few months prior, they were what? Slaves. They worked every day of their lives from the time that they were young until their bodies were laid in the ground. And now, this God is announcing that 1 out of 7 days will be for what?
Sabbath.
Rest. Sabbath. You don't have to work all the time anymore. Henri Blocher, who is a French theologian, writes this. It relativizes the works of mankind, the contents of the 6 working days. It protects mankind from total absorption by the task of subduing the earth. It anticipates a distortion which makes work the sum and purpose of human life. And it informs mankind that he will not fulfill his humanity in his relation to the world, which he is transforming, but only when he raises his eyes above in the blessed holy hour of communion with the Creator. And this line is great. The essence of mankind is not work. The essence of mankind is not work. Or, as you might have heard me in the Sabbath sermon, the commandment on the Sabbath frees us from the slavery of the need to create. It frees us from the slavery. I can't write like American theologian on there. So God's perfect plan, humanity's perfect world, was a matter of choice. The ones created in the image of God were given the option to choose. They got to choose who their sovereign was going to be, who their king was going to be, and they chose. Adam rejected the covenant offered by Yahweh, their suzerain. And Genesis chapter 2, verse 17 makes it really clear what the consequences are going to be, which is what? Death. Yeah. You don't even need to look it up. But although Yahweh had every right to wipe out mankind at that moment, he chose a different route. The route we talked about way back in week 1, which was what? I heard it. Redemption. Redemption. Thank you, Noah. Yeah, redemption. But we're getting ahead of the story. So let's look ahead to Genesis chapter 3, where we see not simply the removal of the blessings that were offered to Adam and Eve, but a reversal of them. So the things that were originally offered as a blessing were now a curse. So let's look at Eve first, okay? One of her blessings was childbirth. She would be the mother of all the living, according to Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. And those of you who are parents know this to be a blessing. Kids are a blessing, and if you're a mother, you have a special bond with your kids. But now this woman who is going to be the mother of all humans, the source of life, will only experience it through pain and injury. And before the industrial age, the leading cause of death for women was what? Childbirth. And it's still that case in parts of the world today. So now the one who gives birth to all of mankind will, in a sense, die doing so. So it's a reversal of that blessing that was given to Eve. Another blessing that was offered to her was her relationship with Adam. In Genesis chapter 1, it's clear that Eve is supposed to rule over creation with Adam. But with the fall, we learn that your desire will be for your husband, and he shall what? Rule over you. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. So they are no longer equals. So what? So what I hear you saying is you think the curse is a really good thing. Okay. We're just going to press on and Todd, I can get you the number for New Creation Counseling. So I got a couch in my office. So what was supposed to be a relationship of mutual respect and submission is now characterized by competition. Adam rules over Eve, and yet her desire is still for the relationship. Despite all of this, despite this reversal of the blessing, Eve is promised that she and Adam will produce an heir that will ultimately defeat the one who deceived her. So even in her fallen and broken state, Eve will still bring forth who? The Christ. Exactly. Will bring forth Christ. Let's look at Adam. He wasn't unaffected, but as we do, how many of you have a garden? Do you have any of you have a garden?
Rosebush garden.
Nobody has a rosebush garden? One. Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you. Some of you have a garden, and I assume you have a garden because you enjoy gardening. But my guess is, I've never had a garden, my wife has, but I'm guessing there are some days you curse your garden because it's just not going well, it's not producing the fruit you wanted to, or the vegetables, you've got weeds, those kind of things just die, there are rabbits, whatever. Adam was created for the Adamah, the cultivatable land. Adam was created to be a farmer. He was supposed to work the ground to get its very best, and the ground was supposed to respond with abundance. The Adamah was supposed to respond to the authority given to Adam so that he could provide for his family. With the fall, Adam's authority over Adamah is broken. The toil now becomes unbearable, and the Adamah frequently responds with no fruit. So, the reversal of the curse, the Adamah, which was designed to serve Adam, is now in rebellion against him. Now, it's important to note that work is not the curse. Okay? Some of you are thinking, you don't know my job. Work is not the curse. Adam was always supposed to work. But the difference between work and play is motivation. You know, I run on a fairly regular basis, but I have a friend who used to say, I only run if someone is chasing me. Like, that was his motivation. The motivation is different, and so when the motivation isn't there, there's no fruit, there's no benefit. Then it becomes work for work's sake, and there's no pleasure in it. Genesis chapter 3, verse 19 says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, to the Adamah, because from it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The phrase, by the sweat of your face, is worth focusing on. We read that and we go, oh, Adam's going to have to work hard in his garden. But it has less to do with the amount of work that he's going to have to put in, and it's more of a figure of speech in the ancient Near East having to do with anxiety. We have this constant thing that happens at our dinner table, and I don't know where it came from. I need to talk to someone about it, but I will finish my plate of food, and I will have this wrestling match with myself. Do I get seconds, or do I not? And my daughter, Hannah, she's to the point, she's like, Dad, you know you're going to do it, and then you're going to regret it. And I do, and I do. But here's the thing, I have this weird scarcity mindset somewhere in me, where I'm like, what if I'm hungry later? Like, I don't want to be hungry. What if there's not enough food to take care of my hunger? And that's what this is talking about. So Adam and Eve, who are supposed to have authority over the ground and abundance because of the fall, have to live with a scarcity mindset. What if I don't have enough? What if the plants don't produce fruit? What if there's a famine? What if? And so this is the curse of Adam. Limited resources, an insecure future, and a world that no longer responds to my commands and to my work. And of course, the worst part of his curse is you will return to the dust. To dust you shall return. And it's almost impossible in their mindset to think about the image bearer of God dying in the field like all the other animals. Adam was made to rule the earth, but now was going to die in it. The ones who were created to cultivate the earth were now going to fertilize it. So the perfect order of God has been flipped on its head. But that's not it. Those aren't the only blessings. They both together collectively received another reversal of blessing. Genesis chapter 3, verses 23 and 24 says, Therefore the Lord God sent them forth from the Garden of Eden. He drove out the humans, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim, and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. And this encapsulates everything that's gone before. Adam has lost Yahweh, and now God's people will have to live in exile from him. They've lost both the presence and the place of God. They've lost the presence and the place of God. So remember the perfect plan, the people of God and the place of God, dwelling in the presence of God. All of that has gone away. The verb for sent here, Adam and Eve were sent out of the garden, is the same word used for divorce or the disowning of a child. And so, by their own choice, Adam and Eve are separated from their Creator. Let's revisit creation for a minute. Visit the 7 days of creation. Remember, this was not a series of random events that took place when Adam and Eve chose autonomy. This was a reversal of God's intent. So in light of the suzerain vassal treaty, how would this have been viewed? Adam and Eve choosing to disobey God. How would that have been viewed in the suzerain vassal treaty? Treason. Right, it would have been treasonous behavior. So instead of choosing this structure, as you see here, that we looked at earlier, they chose this structure with man and woman sitting in whose seat? Yahweh's got seat, right? That seat belongs to Yahweh. They had the right to do this. They had the right to do this. They were given permission to do this. But they don't have the power to hold it all together. Like, that's when everything goes to pot, when they chose that. So in an instant, God's perfect world becomes Adam's broken world. So who's going to fix it? God. Humans can't fix it. We're powerless to do so. Everything that was good and beautiful and right and peaceful is now broken and ugly and scarred. All of creation is now subjected to the curse from Adam's choice. And this brokenness is evident in Romans chapter 8. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility. Not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. All of creation was subjected to futility, but it didn't choose it. It didn't choose it. Who chose it? Adam. Adam chose it. Adam chose it. The only thing that will reverse the curse is by the stewards of Eden being returned to their proper place on the seventh day structure in the line of command. And it's only when redemption takes place will all of creation move back from slavery to what? Freedom. Freedom. So when we talk about being born again, it is so much more than simply getting our golden ticket to heaven. Okay? Redemption is not an individual transaction. Redemption is about all of creation being saved from the effects of sin that we saw in that. So let's talk about what Adam lost, or Adam lost. Adam lost identity. We lost our identity as God's people. We lost our place in paradise. We lost our access to his presence. We lost our intimacy with God, which was the essence of humanity. Adam lost life. The bodies that were made in the image of God were now cursed with death. Our bodies, which while alive today, are slowly rotting. And death is our part of our job description under the curse. Unless Christ returns, that's the fate of all of us in this room. I heard a comedian not too long ago who used statistics to make comedy, and he pointed out that 40% of all marriages end in divorce. And he said that means that 60% end in death. So I don't know which is worse. I had to put something with levity in there because it's really heavy. Anyway, Adam also lost healthy relationships. Our relational world is broken. What was once a perfect intimacy with God and with each other is replaced with self-centeredness and competition. And so when we think about all the brokenness in the world, how everything has gone wrong, a question that people sometimes ask is this: why do bad things happen to good people? Maybe you've asked this, maybe you've heard this asked. Why do babies die? Why are good people killed by senseless violence or drunk drivers? Why are young people struck with cancer? Why are there terrorists? And this question demonstrates that Adam remembers. That there's something in our DNA that knows that what we're experiencing is not what was in God's original intent. That babies aren't supposed to die. That young people aren't supposed to be struck with cancer. That people aren't supposed to die because of senseless violence and drunk drivers. It shows us that we were created for something else. That the image of God is in us somewhere. So how do we answer that question? First of all, there are no good people. There are no good people. Isaiah writes, all our righteous deeds are like a filthy cloth. And that we might think of that as rags. The actual word is a menstrual rag. Sorry. Not real sorry, but compared to what we are created to be, we are completely corrupted. We aren't good. We aren't good. The other answer is the fallenness of the world. Creation is no longer subjected to God's authority due to Adam's choice. God allowed the stewards of all of creation to make a choice, and they chose. They chose to usurp God's authority, and as a result, bad is now the new norm. So we should not ask, why do babies die? Why do some people get cancer? Instead, we should ask, why do some babies live? And why doesn't everybody get cancer? To quote Dr. Sandra Richter, in sum, the answer to the question, why do bad things happen to good people, is this. Every child starving in Darfur, every young Arab woman slaughtered in an honor killing, every body laid to rest because of 9/11 is the victim of Adam's choice. Now, to be clear, if you are with someone who is suffering, do not give them this answer. Okay? This is a theological answer and not a pastoral care answer. Okay? So, I'm sorry that your spouse died, but it's because the world is broken because of Adam and there are no good people. Don't do that. Okay? So let's summarize. God's original intent is this: the people of God in the place of God, dwelling in the presence of God, also known as Eden. And due to Adam's choice, all of that was broken. No longer was Adam in the place of God with full access to his presence. He was cast out of Eden. And it sounds like really bad news. This is sort of a heavy lesson. Maybe not as heavy as, tearing apart a stuffed animal, but this is where the story of redemption begins. It starts here. So there is good news. Next week, we'll talk about God's final intent. This week was God's original intent. Next week, God's final intent. Come back. I'll see you next week. Bring people with you. Have a good week. If you have any questions, come on up. Let's talk. Thanks. Yeah, I meant to say that at the outset. Yeah, I meant to say this at the beginning. This is week 4. I forgot to edit my document, so it says week 3 at the top. Scratch out 3, write 4. Thank you, Barbie. Thank you. And once again, if you can grab pens and markers, take them over to the side, put the markers in the tub, the pens in the bag, throw away any extraneous papers, take unused name tags over to the side. That would be super helpful. Thank you.